Hi, welcome to Autisable Dads, Life with Autism from a Parent's Perspective. In this episode, I chat with Anita Lesko. Anita received a Master's of Science in Anesthesia from Columbia University and works full-time as an anesthesiologist. She was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at the age of 50, and she runs an Asperger support group in her community. She is the author of Asperger Syndrome, When Life Hands You Lemons, Make Lemonade, and she currently resides in Pensacola, Florida. We begin the episode discussing her new book, titled The Complete Guide to Autism in Healthcare, Advice for Medical Professionals and People on the Spectrum. There is so much to learn on how we treat autistic individuals in a hospital environment, and this guide not only helps professionals, but also parents on preparing their children, well, for life. Packed full of practical information, it's really a must-read for everyone who's in the healthcare industry. We also chat about her more recent book, titled Temple Grandin, The Stories I Tell My Friends. Anita shares how she and Temple met and became good friends. This book shows more about who Temple is, beyond what we've seen in lectures, movies, and the public eye. Thank you, Anita, for joining us here on the Autisable Dads podcast. And you are doing so much for the autism community. And there's so much to dive into. I know that I would like to bring you back already for several more episodes down the road. You're trying to tackle the biggest issue that is very close to my heart is autism in healthcare. But share a little bit about what it is that you're doing overall. I mean, you've been on speaking engagements with Temple Grandin. You've been doing all this other type of stuff. Share a little bit about yourself.
Well, for the past 30 years, I've been working full-time as a certified registered nurse anesthetist. I do 40 hours a week in the operating room doing anesthesia for surgery. I didn't get diagnosed or even discover anything about being on the spectrum until I was 50 years old. So the first 23 years of my career, I went not knowing why am I so different, why don't I fit in, why do I have all these sensory issues, social issues. I was always the only person on the spectrum in every workplace. I've been in 5 different jobs over 30 years. The job I'm at now I've been for 20 years. And I recognized, before I knew that I'm on the spectrum, I recognized I was very different than everybody else. But aside from that, just as a patient, when I would have issues that need to be tended to, or just general health issues and whatever, it was always a pretty negative experience in that the doctors, the nurses always would just kind of look at me like I'm from another planet. I felt like I would be marginalized. They would look at me like if I was describing symptoms that obviously were very unusual to them, had never heard of it. They're just looking at me like, wow, this person is like way out there. And I always felt that I really wasn't getting the best care because they don't even understand me. And so as a healthcare provider myself, I would actually just end up half the time treating myself and taking care of things, but sometimes you need medical assistance.
Right.
Then after I got diagnosed, and I started talking to endless others on the spectrum, I found out they had the same exact experiences, whether it was, parents telling me what happened with them, with taking their autistic child to healthcare facilities, or autistic adults themselves describing. And about a year and a half ago, and I realized, wait a minute, I'm a healthcare professional and I'm autistic. Like, I'm going to put this all together and make a guide to educate healthcare providers how to understand us, how to communicate with us, because they have to know that in order to provide quality care for us. So I wrote the book called The Complete Guide to Autism and Healthcare. And my publisher is Future Horizons. And they were very excited about this book because it's the first of its kind. And so I set out, the book came out this past September, so it's not quite a year yet. And so I'm on a mission to do this actually on a global scale because it has to be addressed around the world, not just in America, because it's all over, everywhere. And the book is actually geared not just towards healthcare providers. It can be used for, any kind of healthcare provider, dentist, therapist, psychologist, parents themselves, anybody who works with people on the spectrum, and for people on the spectrum themselves to share with their healthcare providers to help get this process going.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very big issue. I know that sometimes, when we take our son to his doctor, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress right there. Just to take him to the building itself, and then going into the building, all the
Right.
sights, scents, smells, all of the surrounding environment is there. I'm looking at it that you're touching on a lot of things with this book. You're dealing with communication strategies, the medical system, best care practices. You even touch on the Americans with Disabilities Act and HIPAA compliance.
Yes, and what you mentioned though also, and I talk about for parents also how to kind of start conditioning your child when there is going to be an appointment, how to take them there ahead of time, go the route you're going to drive so they get used to that's how they're going to go, look at the building, even go inside, possibly see if they can meet the staff that's going to be involved in the appointment. And then from the other perspective, for the healthcare facilities, how to make environments that are autism friendly, that aren't, for myself, you walk into a healthcare, into a waiting room, and it's jam-packed. There's chairs, everybody's like sandwiched together. There's probably a TV that's going to be blasting. There's bright lights. There's people there that have different perfumes and colognes on. The people on cell phones playing games. So all of you just walked into what I want to turn around and just leave.
Right.
And I'm an adult, so a child, especially on the spectrum, that they're going to have a meltdown for being in that environment while they're waiting for an hour in that waiting room before they even go in for the exam.
And it might not even be the doctor visit itself. It's just waiting in the waiting room that could be a huge contribution. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I try to suggest environments that can be created. But, and actually somebody said to me, they read it and they said, this just should be for everywhere. Like the lady said to me, she goes, I'm not on the spectrum, but I wish I could walk into a place like what you're describing as opposed to what reality is. And she goes, this would just make healthcare a whole lot better for everybody if these things were done, and I realized, yes, that's true. So yes, it's very complex, but most all of that can be done at no cost or very little cost to change the environment.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know that there's some professionals, there's some doctors that actually they're able to visit their patient right outside the door of their office. Like go into their patient's car. And just do it like if it's a quick checkup, check everything, how everything's going, just so the child doesn't have to go through that. They actually make preparations for the doctor to actually visit right outside the office building. And I love it when doctors talk about that, that they're able, it's like, yeah, we just need to see them. It doesn't matter if it's right inside the building, but they need to check in, they need to go through process, and they need to be seen, but the doctor can't go anywhere. They're still on the grounds. It's just, I'm going to go out back and visit this family, visit the kid. And
I don't know if you remember the old days when they used to make house calls. Doctors made house calls and came to a house. Of course, in an ideal situation, that would be grand for doctors to be able to go visit the autistic person at their home. But of course, that's in this day and age, that's probably not very, except maybe some rural areas or something. But
yeah. I mean, that would be really nice. Now, in regards to the Americans with Disabilities Act and HIPAA compliance, what type of recommendations would you go with that, or is that just informational on those things?
That's just extra information. The one thing though is I have a very small chapter about if a patient has to be an inpatient. How that person could possibly be identified readily by staff to kind of already know how to handle the situation somewhat differently. But then, of course, then you go in with the HIPAA compliance of privacy and everything, and that would be something that a patient would have to agree on. If they did have, they put those little wristbands with your name and your medical number, and all of that on there, but I had suggested a little, some kind of a little sticker or a special wristband that would include the autism puzzle piece somehow to identify the patient as being autistic. But then there again, that would have to be agreed upon by the patient, the family. Do they want everybody to see that? Or because if not, then they wouldn't be able to utilize that. It just would be more beneficial for the patient if that was agreed upon, so that different steps could already be taken in planning the patient's care.
Right. Do you have any examples of somebody that read your book and said, we took some of these examples and we started to putting them into action, and they told you the results beyond what you just shared previously?
Actually, no, not to the extent where they've actually done the different stages. I've had people, places where have went through the book and starting to use, everything takes time to get into place. And so starting to do some of the things have changed, with like starting kind of from the beginning, from scratch, or changing the environment, making special separate waiting areas for people on the spectrum that's just quiet and kind of isolated from all the noise, and no TVs and indirect lighting and all of that, because that will drastically minimize the stress.
Right.
Then there's places that will have little videos online where they show, you can watch a little video. Okay, here's the staff. Here's what's going to happen. Here's kind of what to expect. People can watch those kind of things. And I'm in the beginning stages now, working with different nursing schools and medical schools of using that book incorporating the book into their training, actual curriculum. And of course, the question is, who is going to be teaching that particular course?
Right.
Is it going to be me? Because I am looking to, I think I can do a lot more good for a lot more people by doing this kind of thing full time, as opposed to my anesthesia career. So at some point I probably will be transitioning to working with strictly all the autism related issues, as opposed to going to the operating room every day.
Right. Now,
over time.
Right. Of course. I think that's the goal. When we find that passion, when we find that thing that we really want to do, we would really prefer to do that full time, and I see where you're going.
Right.
Now, you were not diagnosed until 50, and, dealing with being diagnosed as an adult rather than as a child, there's a whole thing that you just shared on that. But one of the things I want to touch on is that there's many women that are diagnosed late or misdiagnosed as children. Why do you think this is?
Well, one of the things, in my case, my mother never even took me to be evaluated like for anything, because after I discovered I'm on the spectrum, then we realized so was my mother. So of course, to her, there was nothing odd about me, because she was odd too.
Okay.
So she never had any reason to think, well, what's wrong with my kid? She's different than everybody else, because she didn't recognize it, because she was different too. She did know. She spent a lot of time getting called in by the principals of schools because I was causing some trouble or another, or just sitting there not doing anything at all, like staring out the window, because I'd be imagining 100,000 different things except what was going on in the classroom. I was not the world's best student by any means until actually my last year in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, something I just sprung to life, so to speak. But I think with females on the spectrum, well, of course, if some people are in my age group, they went under the wire, because like all this really wasn't in vogue back then when you were like in elementary school and junior high and high school. Because there's a lot of men like being diagnosed at this age in their life as well. But
Right.
Females, I think, just because by nature females are a little more, they're nurturing, probably a little more on the social side, even though they might, if they're on the spectrum. And I think they kind of just go under the wire. Now, one of the things I see is people who I think they hear about autism, Asperger's, and all this early on, and maybe they're taken to be evaluated. So there's some question maybe that they might be on the spectrum, but nobody really has made any definitive diagnosis on them. But I see people who say they try to pretend to be normal. Well, I wouldn't even know what that means to pretend to be normal, because I've just always just been myself my whole life, because I didn't know any better. I was supposed to be pretending to be something else.
Right. And I honestly don't know what normal is.
Right.
I appear every day and I just go, okay, so that's new. You know, we are who we are, and we just have to, take a look at that and go, oh, okay, that's new. With the propensity of, CDC rates and autism being 1 in 68 and all, and 1 in 54 boys, I think what it is, but there's a lot of women and young girls that are diagnosed, late in life or misdiagnosed as children. And, as you touched on several aspects of that, what type of advice would you like to share with other women that have been diagnosed with autism as an adult rather than as a child?
I see. When I got diagnosed, I took it as like this major revelation. Like, oh, okay, so this is why I have, X, Y, and Z problems, these sensory things. I think it was all just me. I'm the only person in this whole entire Earth, this whole planet. I'm the only one. Out of a gazillion people, I'm the only one that had all these things. So then when I find out, oh well, no, there's millions just like this with the same problem. Oh, okay, well then that's not so bad.
Okay.
And just learning about it, and I just felt it was like this major revelation that totally changed my life. Now I don't focus on that. In fact, like I get up and I go to work every day, and I do my thing, and I work. I'm so busy, we're taking care of patients. We work as a team. I have no time to sit there and think, oh my God, I'm autistic, and oh my God, it's just, I just do my thing. And I tell people, just don't sit there thinking about a diagnosis. Yes, it's part of you, but it doesn't define you. Don't let it define you. Don't think of yourself as a label. Everybody's different. Whether because I work in an environment with all neurotypicals, and I see and I hear people with stories of things they're struggling with. A family member might be sick. They might. Just there's a million things that people have that they're dealing with in their life. And so, okay, maybe they're not autistic and they don't have to deal with that stuff, but that's something that they have to deal with. Rarely is there anybody that has just absolutely perfect life and nothing that's causing them stress or grief or something.
Okay. So one of the things that we're always asked, or at least I'm always asked, is if you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, what should I do? Well, we got on Anchor because when we were trying to figure out how to distribute content or how to be able to record easily, Anchor's worked best for us. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. Best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with great sponsors you want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast, make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. You're listening to Autisable Dads, Life with Autism from a Parent's Perspective. Autisable is a social blogging community that provides a platform where anyone can join, connect, share, and discuss anything autism related. Autisable also provides digital marketing services for small and mid-sized nonprofits. For more information, visit autisable.com. Now, back to the podcast.
Right. So that's why I said just don't focus on the whole autism thing. Yes, you have to make accommodations for certain things, the sensory issues and that kind of thing. And no, it isn't always easy by any means. But I always think this, especially because I'm in healthcare and I see things that are a whole lot worse than being autistic. You know, patients that are like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so thankful I'm not them.
Right.
So I think I probably look at this whole autism thing from a very different perspective than others who are different, simply because I see people that, you know, burned on 100% of their body and they were in the burn unit or in some catastrophic accident or have some disease process that's making them totally incapacitated, like have Lou Gehrig's disease and they're only 35 and they're totally incapacitated in a wheelchair. Now, is my autism really that bad? No. So that's how I guess I have a different perspective.
No, actually, I've heard a very similar response from other autistic individuals that have been diagnosed later in life. Is that it's become more of an eye opener about how, you know, it explains a lot of what's happened in their past, and
Yes.
and it allows, you know, of course, correct me if I'm wrong, it allows you the opportunity to be able to go, oh, okay, that's why this happened. That's now I can make adjustments. Now I can be able to accommodate.
Yes.
And no, I mean, it explains fully why several people that I've talked to that have been diagnosed later in life have had that experience. Very, very, I like finding these what I call golden nuggets in the autism community. And you mentioned two of them. One of them was the aspect of it's more of an eye opener and not to focus on the diagnosis, but that aspect of it, and as a byproduct of that, it's a gift, you know, in that respect, you know, it's a gift in knowing what's going on with you so that you can be able to make those accommodations. But I think the other nugget is that you're the second person that I've talked to on this program that doesn't focus on the label, which I find fascinating. The other person was Ben Lewin, who I interviewed, and he suffered from polio. And he's been around long enough to where he said that, and I may have to listen to that podcast again because I thought it was hilarious. But you know, he grew up in a time where, you know, he went to a school for the crippled, and we don't use that word anymore, you know, in our jargon. And I think the aspect of labels, you know, we need to know, you know, where somebody falls in the spectrum, but I think not focusing on the label, like what you're talking about, it just explains something and provides avenues, but it's not something to like focus on. I like that. I like that aspect.
Yeah, I think the biggest area of growth, I think, well, like my personal life, myself, we said before, where I can look back at something and say, oh, you know, wow, okay, so I did that, yes, because I'm autistic, that's how my reaction to the situation was. But now I have the ability to look at the situation and step back and kind of look at it from another point of view and say, okay, like I think in my workplace is the biggest area of change and growth that I've overcome. And certainly if my boss was on the third line, he would attest to that. There's been, you know, and in a workplace, I would say I get along with and work just fine with probably 99% of people, which is actually a pretty great, you know, there'll be one or two people that's, you know, makes things uncomfortable, but then I'm sure there's neurotypical people that, you know, nobody's going to go to a workplace and get along just spectacular with everybody. And I recognize that. I've also realized where sometimes my past will make me first, like if somebody, a situation recently, a coworker who I've known for many years, she's a great person. She's done really wonderful things to me, for me. She's always, she has an affectionate nickname that she calls me and all that. And then recently she said something, I grossly misinterpreted what she said. And at first I got really upset. And then, like, after I thought about it, I'm like, okay, you know what? I really realized she didn't mean that how I thought she meant it, because why after all these years she's so great to me, why would she do something like that now? And then I went to talk to her, and she's crying, telling me, no, that, she goes, I was so upset that I upset you. And then we both cried, and we talked about it, and everything is just all cool and all back to normal.
Right.
But I'm at the point where I can do something like that, as opposed to, probably, I'm sure before my diagnosis, that would just be the end of it. Don't want to talk to them anymore. Oh my God, they hurt my feelings. They did this or that. But now I can look at it and say, no, wait a minute. Okay, then let's talk about this and have a meaningful conversation. And I think that is a really big, to me, a really big, important aspect of personal growth to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And even being able to get that relationship and then a marriage. And then that's the strongest point of our marriage is being able to communicate with each other, which is something they do every single day.
Right.
Which some people, I think, find funny. Oh, two autistic people who talk and talk and talk. Yes. It is kind of funny, but yes, and it's possible.
That's awesome. I'm going to step aside for a moment and go back to your book, the healthcare book, Autism and Healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
Complete Guide. There's a couple things that I found in researching this information is that, and one thing I did not know is that anesthesia in particular, there's a reaction with many people with autism.
If they have the mitochondrial dysfunction aspect, a small percentage of people on the spectrum have it, and I've come to find out I actually personally do have it, and I found that out when I had anesthesia back in 2009. I didn't know at that point yet that I'm on the spectrum, but I had really strange reaction to anesthesia, and I had handpicked who was going to do my anesthesia, and I told them exactly how I wanted it done. So, I mean, how obnoxious is that? But as an anesthesia provider, what else would I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I told them exactly, I want this and this, and then and so afterwards, when it took me like a very, very, very long time to wake up, despite that he did do everything just as I had asked him to. So there was no reason technically for why I should have been like that. And then it took me a couple of weeks to actually have any strength back or energy. And it was just totally abnormal from other people who get anesthesia. So at the time, I didn't know why. Well, as I researched for all this for the book and started finding all this out, I'm like, oh, so that's why. And then I realized I have all the symptoms of the mitochondrial dysfunction, which is exhaustion all the time. You tend to get a lot of muscle cramps in your legs. So people, what I suggested in the book is that anesthesia providers just think of the person on the spectrum as that they very well could have the mitochondrial dysfunction, and just use the suggested outline of what I provided in there. Just keep it simple and use certain drugs instead of other drugs. And it doesn't cost anything to do these changes. And it just isn't like a preventive medicine, so to speak, to prevent anything potentially catastrophic from happening.
So
just think any.
So it's to help mitigate those potential risks.
Right. Just minimize the risk, and then just the risk become just pretty much the same as any other person that's going to receive anesthesia.
Oh, okay. Okay. That I didn't know that. That's definitely something, parents should know. And of course, healthcare providers should know. The only other question that I have in regards to the healthcare industry in and of itself is, and it's one thing that we as parents have come across time and time and time again, is insurance doesn't cover a lot of things that are for autism patients.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that you could be able to shine a light on here, since you're in the medical profession, or anything that you've come across? on here? I'm just
I mean,
curious.
I'm just thinking, I've never been asked that. It's a great question. And what I'm just thinking, because I'm thinking in terms of, surgery and anesthesia, which there really wouldn't be anything any different
Right.
related to that than any other patient. So as far as that particular avenue goes, I wouldn't think that there's anything extra that would be necessary for an autistic patient. So as far as that goes, but no, I mean, I hear stories from parents, for like therapies and all that kind of thing that so much is not covered and
Right.
it's out of their own pocket.
Yeah.
But as far as surgery anesthesia, no.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that distinction was very clear, and thank you for helping to clarify that. On aspects of physical illness or surgery, insurance, if you have it, should cover it, obviously. However, on Autisable and within the parents of the autism community, it is a very common issue on dealing with therapies or things that if it's not done in a clinic, it's not going to get covered. If it's not done in a hospital, it's not going to get covered under insurance.
Right.
And that's been a very common theme in the autism community. But wow, we've covered a lot of bases here. There was another book that you wrote, and I think we'll bring you back on to focus on that book. It deals with Temple Grandin, The Stories I Tell My Friends. Let's highlight that as a little teaser.
I met Temple back in 2012, actually. She had my first book that I ever wrote was just after I got diagnosed. It's called Asperger's Syndrome: When Life Hands You Lemons, Make Lemonade. And I wrote that literally immediately after I got diagnosed, and everything came flooding in my mind. And Temple saw that book, and one night, it was a Saturday night, and as a person on the spectrum, I have no friends, so if my phone rings on a Saturday night at 9 o'clock, it must be a wrong number. And my mom was alive at that time. I looked there, I said, "Oh Lord, this is some wrong number." So I answer the phone, and this strange voice says, "May I please speak to Anita Lesko?" I said, "Speaking." She goes, "This is Temple Grandin." My eyes about came out of my head, and I'm standing there and like, Temple Grandin is calling me? Well, she was just starting to write a book called Different, Not Less, and she was calling to ask if she can feature me in that book. And the first thought I thought of was, do you really need to ask me that? Like, yes, of course.
That's awesome.
So that was my first interaction with Temple. Then I had organized an autism conference in 2013 in Pensacola, Florida, which she was the keynote speaker at. So I met her in person then, and we became friends. I mean, when I think back, when we talk about it, we were both, our youth was spent shoveling out horse stalls and crazy things that we did like that. So of course we were gravitated to each other to be friends. Well, over the years we'd talk every now and then, and one particular day, about a year ago, she had called me. I happened to be at work, and I had some time between cases, and so we talked, and we got on something really funny, and Temple was laughing so hard that I'm laughing hard, and after we got off the phone, and I'm thinking, I wish the rest of the world could see her like I see her, because I know they see her as Temple, the researcher, the scientist, the lecturer, and all that, very professional and everything, but she's got a wild and crazy side to her. So then I thought, wait a minute, what if I write a book about her, and like kind of a tell-all book?
Uh-huh.
So I called her that afternoon, and I asked her, what would you think about that? So from there, the cogs of the wheel started going. And then over the next 5 months, I spent 60 hours interviewing her on the phone. Last August, I flew out to Fort Collins, Colorado, where she teaches at Colorado State University. They had a big 70th birthday bash for her. So I went to that and met lots of people. One of them, which actually was the Hollywood director who directed the HBO movie Temple Grandin.
Oh, yeah.
And so I got to interview him, and he actually wrote the foreword for this book. And so, the things over time of doing these interviews, I'd be sitting here at my kitchen table and listen to these stories, and we'd start off in one thing and probably touched 60 different topics by the end of the conversation. So finally, I put it together, and a lot of it is that her actual, in fact, actually, it is her actual words. I turned it into like a reading story, but you can see where it's her, because I didn't want to change anything. I'm like, well, this is Temple's words, so this is what people need to see, how she said it, and everything. I'm not changing it into a storybook. It's supposed to be Temple's words. So, I think the most shocking thing is when she talked about she had written a letter to B.F. Skinner, the world famous psychologist, and she was so in awe of him. She thought him the god of psychology.
Right.
So she couldn't believe 3 weeks later she gets a letter back from him, and he invited her to come and meet him at his office at Harvard University. So Temple went there, and she wore a dress and nice outfit and everything. And so she said she's walking up to the building at Harvard campus, and she's like, wow, when she came there, she said, this is the building where the god of psychology is in there. So she went inside, and she was directed to his office, and he greeted her. And when she came in there, he motioned for her to sit down. And so she no sooner sits down, and he's looking at her legs, and he goes, may I touch your legs? And she looked at him, and she goes, you may look at my legs, but you may not touch them. And she said, in that moment, everything was just shattered. There went the image that she had of him as the god of psychology. Now she goes, now he's like any other guy. That's
Oh, man.
So there's all the details of that whole thing in there. So, and there's just pretty crazy stuff of her childhood, things she's never told anybody.
No, people need to hear these stories. I mean, it's one of those. I'm reminded of the phrase "never meet your heroes" because you'll get disappointed. And
yeah,
I hear that all the time. And I think the autism community looks at Temple Grandin as this trailblazer, in the autism community.
Well, she is, and she still is. But you know what? I think for parents to read this book, because if I was a parent that had an autistic child, when I read the stuff like Temple did as a kid, I'd be like, well, wow, this was like any other kid. I mean, she did things, like love to go on the beach and collect seashells. And once she found a message in a bottle that she thought was like the greatest thing, then she started putting messages in bottles and throwing them off the dock or off of a boat or something and see how far it would go and hope that the person who found it would respond to her. And just all kind of childhood things. And of course, as she progressed in life and then when she became an adult, but just things that people have never heard before. And it then makes her like a real person.
Yeah. I mean, there's more than just Temple Grandin, the person that publicly we all know, but we're all human. We all have those other aspects of us that just make us who we are. And I think that's brilliant. I got to get myself a copy of this. So, The Stories I Tell My Friends by Anita Lesko. And for those listening, I will have links to all of this in the blog post on Autisable. So, wow, a lot of stuff. There's so much that you and I could be able to chat about in regards to the autism in the healthcare industry and how we could be able to do that. And then, of course, with Temple Grandin and your friendship with her and so you two are just good friends now. Yeah,
we're good friends, and we meet up with each other when we go to these different. She goes speaking like multiple times a week. I still am working my job, so I do that and fit in as many of the speaking engagements that they give me the list. Pick out what you can do. So I have to work at my job to arrange my some time off to go and fly to these different places. We have Dallas coming up, then Miami, then Ithaca, New York, Nashville. I'm meeting up with her at all these various places.
Oh wow!
And so it's always a big adventure.
I see you two as the dynamic duo. Just
That's what. It is an adventure. Anywhere where I'm going to be with Temple, it's an adventure.
that's
And
awesome.
I like to put on a big show. Temple thinks it's hilarious how I do my presentation, how I started out. It's a very very different than anybody who does autism presentations, and so I always give the audience quite a show, and she thinks it's hilarious.
Any fireworks, any indoor fireworks, or any type of things like that you're putting on a show? Lights, music?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for listening in. If you just started listening to this podcast, it is Anita Lesko, diagnosed later in life at 50 years of age with autism, who works in the healthcare industry as an anesthesiologist. Anita, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast. And I'm going to have to bring you back on. This has been fun.
My pleasure. I'll be happy to come back.
Thank you once again to Anita Lesko for answering several questions and sharing her passion in helping healthcare professionals understand and care for their autistic patients. If you'd like to continue this discussion, please feel free to join Autisable.com and share them. You can also follow via social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As a reminder, this podcast is available on Spotify, Google Play Music, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. And thank you for listening to Life with Autism from a Parent's Perspective.